The wind came first. It rolled in from the gray horizon, carrying the sharp taste of salt and cold iron, rattling the hides stretched along the longships. The sea breathed heavily beneath them, dark and restless, as if it already sensed blood. Sound. Wind howling softly, waves slapping against wood. Along the shoreline, men moved in silence. Boots sank into wet sand. Shields were checked, tightened, loosened again by nervous hands. A few warriors stared out of the water, their faces carved by fear they would never admit aloud. Others hid it behind jokes, spoken to quietly to be brave. Einar pulled his cloak tighter and glanced at the sky. Low clouds pressed down like a lid, turning the world into steel and shadow. "The gods are watching," he muttered. Beside him, Rolf ran a thumb along the edge of his axe, slow and careful. "They always are," he said. "The question is whether they care." A horn sounded once from farther down the beach. Sound. Distant horn, low and hollow. The talking stopped. Men gathered near the largest ship, its dragon head rising from the mist, jaws open in a silent snarl. Tar and fresh-cut pine filled the air. The ship creaked as if alive, eager to be unleashed. This was not a raid for silver cups or weak villages. This was war, planned, sworn, and paid for with blood yet to be spilled. The Jarl stood on a rock, his cloak snapping behind him. He was older than most, beard streaked with gray, but his eyes were sharp, burning with purpose. When he spoke, his voice carried over the surf. "We sail before dawn," he said, "across open water into enemy land. They have walls. They have soldiers. They believe us to be monsters from stories told to frighten children." A few grim smiles appeared. "Today," the Jarl continued, "we teach them those stories are true." Sound. Shields shifting, men exhaling. Einar felt his stomach tighten. He had fought before. Raids, skirmishes, quick violence followed by fire and laughter. This was different. The enemy would be waiting. Organized. Ready? He thought of his home, the narrow valley where the river froze early, where his mother still placed food out for spirits she claimed watched over the family. He wondered if they would recognize his body if it came back broken, or if it would come back at all. The order came quickly. Ships were pushed into the water. Oars splashed in unison, cutting through the dark surface. The longship slid forward like hunting beasts released from chains. Sound. Oars entering water, rhythmic splashing. Mist clung to the sea, swallowing the coastline behind them. With each stroke, the land of safety faded. Men sat shoulder to shoulder, shields stacked, weapons resting across knees. Breathing slowed. Thoughts grew loud. Rolf leaned close. "If I fall," he said, voice low, "take my arm ring. Give it to my son." Einar swallowed. "You'll give it to him yourself." Rolf smiled thin and tight. "We'll see." The voyage lasted hours, or perhaps only moments. Time bent strangely at sea. When the lookout hissed a warning, every spine straightened. Shore ahead. Through thinning fog, dark shapes rose, cliffs, then timber structures beyond. Fires burned along the coast. Not villages. Watch posts. "They know we're coming," someone whispered. The horn sounded again, sharper this time. Sound. Horn blast closer, urgent, oars dug deep. Ships surged forward. Arrows suddenly streaked from the shore, thin black lines against the sky. One struck a shield with a crack that echoed across the water. Another man screamed as it buried into his shoulder. Shields up, which slammed together. The sea churned as ships veered, trying to avoid rocks barely visible beneath the surface. The enemy's horns answered from land, multiple voices calling out alarms. Sound. Arrows whistling, men shouting, horns answering. The first ship struck sand hard. Men leapt over the sides, boots splashing, shields raised. Einar jumped after them, icy water seizing his legs. He stumbled, caught himself, then ran. An enemy soldier charged from behind a wooden barrier, spear lowered. Einar barely had time to react. He lifted his shield. The spear slammed into it, jarring his arm numb. Rolf was there an instant later, axe biting deep. The man fell without a sound. No cheers followed. There was no time. More enemies poured from the structures, trained, armored, moving in formation. This was not a frightened coast. This was a prepared defense. "Form up," someone shouted. "Shield wall." Sound. Shields locking, boots grinding in sand. Einar pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers who now felt like brothers. Breath fogged the air. Arrows thudded into shields. One punched through wood and took a man in the throat. He dropped instantly, blood spraying dark against the pale sand. The first clash came like thunder. Metal rang. Wood splintered. Men screamed, some in rage, some in terror. Einar stabbed blindly past his shield, felt resistance, then warmth. He did not look down. The enemy pushed hard, trying to break the line before more ships could land. Behind Einar, he heard the surf and the relentless arrival of more warriors. Sound, battle chaos, steel on steel, crashing waves. For a moment, fear threatened to tear through him. Not fear of pain, but of meaninglessness, that he would die here, nameless, swallowed by water and sand. Then the Jarl's voice cut through the noise. "Hold! Hold the line!" The shield wall steadied. Axes rose and fell. Spears found gaps. Slowly, painfully, the enemy line bent. Einar felt something harden inside him. The fear did not vanish, but it changed. It became focus, purpose, survival. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting pale light over a shoreline already stained red. Smoke rose from burning watchposts. The battle was far from over, but the landing had been won. Einar leaned on his shield, breathing hard. Around him lay the dead, enemy and kin alike. The sea whispered behind them, uncaring. Rolf clapped a bloodied hand on his shoulder. "Still breathing," he said. "For now," Einar replied. He looked inland, where hills and fortifications waited. This was only the beginning. The real war lay ahead, beyond the shore, beyond the screams, where kings and armies would decide who would be remembered and who would be forgotten. The shore no longer belonged to the sea alone. It belonged to the living and the dead, to shattered shields half buried in sand, to bodies twisted at impossible angles. Smoke drifted low, stinging the eyes, carrying the smell of burned wood and iron-rich blood. Sound. Distant crackling fire, labored breathing, waves retreating. Einar wiped his face with the back of his hand and came away red. He did not know whose blood it was. Nearby, men dragged the wounded away from the surf, laying them on cloaks. Others finished the dying with quiet efficiency, blades moving with grim mercy. The Jarl moved among them, his presence steadying. "We do not linger," he said. "They will regroup inland. So will we." A runner arrived, breathless. Scouts report a fortified road beyond the dunes. Wooden palisades. Spears and heavy shields. Rolf spat into the sand. "They've learned our ways." "They've learned enough," the Jarl replied. "But not everything." Sound. Horn blast short and commanding. The war band formed again, smaller now. Faces were harder, eyes darker. The beach had stripped away illusions. Ahead lay hills veined with narrow paths, fields cut by ditches, and the first signs of real resistance. They advanced inland under a sky, clearing to cold blue. Birds circled overhead, drawn by the noise and the promise of flesh. Einar tried not to look up. As they approached the road, the first enemy volley came without warning. Javelins arced from behind the palisade, thudding into earth and shields. One struck a man beside Einar on the thigh. He screamed and fell, clutching the shaft. "Forward," came the order. Sound, running feet, shouting. They rushed the barrier. The enemy fought in disciplined ranks, locking shields, stabbing with practiced rhythm. This was no rabble. These were soldiers sworn to hold ground, not flee from terror. The clash at the palisade was brutal and intimate. Axes hacked at shield rims. Spears punched through gaps. Men grappled, slipped, stabbed at faces inches away. Einar felt a shield slam into his chest, driving the breath from him. He stumbled, fell to one knee. A shadow loomed. A sword flashed down. Einar raised his shield just in time, the impact splitting the wood. Pain jolted up his arm. He roared and lunged, driving his knife into the man's thigh. The enemy cried out and toppled backward. Rolf hauled Einar up by the shoulder. "Stand," he shouted. "Stand or die." They surged again. A warrior with a heavy axe broke through the palisade gate, splintering timbers. The enemy line faltered for a heartbeat, and that was enough. Sound, wood cracking, men yelling. The Vikings poured through the breach, forcing the defenders back along the road. Some fled toward the hills. Others held, dying where they stood. When it ended, the road was choked with bodies. The palisade burned, flames climbing hungrily. Victory tasted bitter. Einar sank onto a rock, chest heaving. Around him, men laughed softly, not from joy but release. Others stared into nothing. A young warrior knelt beside a fallen enemy, removing a ring. His hands shook. He had a family, the boy whispered, as if realizing for the first time. "So, did we?" Rolf replied, not unkindly. Sound, fire roaring, distant cries of wounded. Scouts returned before the flames died. "They're massing," one said. "An army beyond the river. Shields like a wall. Cavalry." The word rippled through the ranks. Cavalry meant speed, discipline, power. The Jarl listened, then nodded slowly. "Good. Then they come to us tired and afraid." They marched to the river by dusk. It was narrow but deep, banks deep and slick with mud. The Jarl positioned his men where the crossing would choke the enemy's advance. "Here," he said, pointing with his sword. "They cannot surround us." Sound, water flowing steadily. Night fell cold and sharp. Fires were forbidden. Men huddled close, weapons in hand. Somewhere across the river, enemy horns sounded, testing the dark. Einar lay awake, staring at the stars. He thought of the stories, of warriors welcomed in the halls of gold, of songs sung by skalds. He wondered who would sing for those who drowned unseen, who died nameless in mud. Rolf broke the silence. "If we live," he said softly, "this will be remembered. If we die," Einar asked. Rolf shrugged. "Then it won't matter." Before dawn, the river erupted with sound. Sound, hooves splashing, shouted commands, horns blaring. Enemy forces surged into the crossing. Shields raised, cavalry pressing behind them. Arrows darkened the sky. One struck a man near Einar, dropping him without a word. "Now!" the Jarl shouted. The Vikings charged into the water, meeting the enemy midstream. The river turned red almost instantly. Horses screamed, slipping on stones. Men were dragged under, armor pulling them down. Einar stabbed at his shield, felt his blade catching flesh. An enemy soldier locked eyes with him for a heartbeat. Fear, hatred, recognition, then vanished beneath the current. The fighting was chaos. The river stole balance and breath. A cavalry horse crashed into the line, its rider swinging wildly. Rolf brought his axe down on the horse's neck. The animal collapsed, crushing its rider. Sound, screams, water churning, metal clashing. Slowly, impossibly, the enemy momentum broke. Bodies clogged the crossing. Orders turned to screams. Those behind could not push forward. Those ahead could not retreat. When the sun rose, it revealed a field of horror. The river ran sluggish, thick with blood. Survivors on the far bank fled. Silence followed, heavy and unreal. Einar stood trembling, soaked and shaking. He had lived. Many had not. The Jarl surveyed the scene, his face grim. "This war is not won," he said, "but today it bends toward us." Einar looked at the fallen, at the water carrying pieces of the dead downstream. Victory had a shape now, and it was cruel. As the war band regrouped, he understood something clearly for the first time. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was a decision to move forward anyway, knowing the cost would only grow higher from here. Morning light crept slowly across the riverbank, pale and indifferent. Mist lifted from the water in thin veils, revealing what night had tried to hide. Bodies lay tangled among broken shields and snapped spears, caught in reeds or pressed against stones. Ravens had already begun their work. Sound, wings flapping, distant crows, soft river current. Einar stood at the edge of the bank, staring down at the water. His arms ached. His hands shook when he loosened his grip on the shield. Around him, men moved like ghosts, exhausted and hollow-eyed, stepping carefully between the dead. No one spoke loudly. Victory at the river had cost too much to celebrate. Rolf knelt nearby, washing his axe in the stream. The water around the blade darkened instantly. "It doesn't come off," he muttered. "The smell—" Einar nodded. "It never does." The Jarl called them together once the sun climbed higher. He stood among the fallen, not above them. "We move," he said. "They'll retreat to their stronghold. Stone walls, towers. If we wait, they'll be reinforced." A murmur ran through the ranks. Stone meant something different than timber and earth. Stone meant time, patience, and death. Sound, armor shifting, low murmurs. They marched along a narrow road carved between fields and forest. The land grew uneven, climbing slowly. Signs of hurried retreat appeared. Discarded shields, broken carts, blood-stained grass. The enemy had fled, but not in disorder. They were drawing the Vikings in. By midday, the stronghold rose before them. Thick stone walls crowned a rocky hill, banners snapping in the wind. Archers lined the parapets, already notching arrows. Einar felt his stomach sink. "They'll bleed us dry from up there," he said. Rolf squinted at the walls. "Or starve us if we wait." The first arrow fell among them, striking a shield with a sharp crack. Sound, arrow impact, echoing. The Jarl raised his sword. "We test them." Shields lifted. The war band advanced within bow range. Arrows rained down, hammering wood and flesh. One man screamed as an arrow pierced his thigh. Another collapsed, clutching his chest. "Back!" the Jarl ordered. "Enough." They withdrew, dragging the wounded with them. The walls loomed silent again, confident. Night came heavy and cold. Fires burned in the distance beyond the walls, taunting. The Vikings made camp just beyond arrow range, using shields and fallen trees for cover. Food was rationed. Water was shared sparingly. Sound, crackling fire, low wind. Einar sat with Rolf, chewing dried meat. "We can't take that place head-on." Rolf nodded. "No, but walls don't watch forever." Scouts were sent into the forest under cover of darkness. The Jarl spoke quietly with his captains. Plans formed in whispers, shaped by desperation and experience. Before dawn, a horn sounded from the stronghold. One long note, uneasy. Sound, distant horn, uncertain. Einar was awake instantly. He rose, shield ready. Shapes move along the forest edge. Shadows slipping between trees. Then screams erupted from behind the walls. Flames burst skyward. Smoke poured from within the stronghold. "They're burning," someone whispered. The scouts had found a weakness, an unguarded supply gate, a storehouse packed with grain and oil. Fire spread faster than stone could contain. The main gate creaked open as defenders poured out, desperate to say what they could. "Now!" the Jarl roared. Sound, horn blasts, sudden shouting. The Vikings surged forward. The enemy met them in chaos, formation broken by panic. Archers dropped bows and drew swords. Men fought in the open, away from the safety of walls. Einar crashed into the melee, shield first. He struck, stabbed, shoved. Smoke stung his eyes. Firelight flickered across terrified faces. A soldier lunged at him, wild-eyed. Einar parried clumsily, then drove his spear forward. The man fell, gasping, hands clutching at nothing. Rolf fought nearby, axe rising and falling in brutal rhythm. "Press them," he shouted. "Don't let them reform." Sound, roaring flames, metal clashing. The defenders tried to regroup near the gate. Shields locking, officers shouting orders. For a moment, it looked as if discipline might return. Then a tower collapsed inward, stone cracking, fire roaring. Dust and sparks filled the air. The enemy line wavered and broke. Some fled back inside, only to be trapped by flames. Others ran downhill, throwing weapons aside. By the time the sun rose fully, the stronghold belonged to the Vikings. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the moans of the wounded. Einar leaned against the stone wall, exhausted beyond words. His body felt heavy, as if gravity itself had increased. Around him, men stared at what they had taken and what it had cost. The Jarl stood atop the hill, looking out over the land. Smoke drifted behind him like a dark cloak. "This place will be remembered," he said quietly. "Not for its walls, but for how it fell." Rolf approached Einar, blood streaking his beard. "We're deeper now," he said. "No easy way back." Einar looked at the road stretching beyond the hill, leading into richer lands, stronger kingdoms. He understood. Each victory closed one door and opened another, darker one. Below them, ravens gathered in greater numbers, their cries sharp and eager. Sound, ravens calling wind through smoke. Einar closed his eyes briefly. The gods, if they were watching, were being fed well, and the war, this long, merciless thing, was only beginning to reveal its true shape. The stronghold smoldered behind them as they marched on, its blackened stones still warm beneath the rising sun. Smoke clung to the air and followed the war band like a shadow that refused to be shaken. No songs were sung. No boasts were made. Each step carried them farther from the shore and deeper into a land that now knew their faces. Sound, slow marching boots, distant crackle of embers, wind over hills. Einar's shoulders burned from the weight of his shield. His thoughts were heavier still. Victory had come quickly at the walls. Too quickly. He had learned enough battles to know that such ease was never free. Scouts returned before noon, faces tight. "Riders," one said. "Fast. Organized. They're tracking us from the south." Cavalry again. Rolf exhaled slowly. "They won't charge blind this time." The Jarl listened, then gave his orders. "We don't run. We choose the ground." They turned north toward a shallow valley where the land narrowed between rocky slopes and thick woodland. A stream cut to the center, its banks muddy and uneven. It was not perfect, but it would deny the enemy speed. Sound, water flowing, leather creaking. The war band formed a defensive arc as they reached the valley floor. Shields locked, spears angled forward. Men took positions among rocks and fallen trees. Faces were pale with fatigue, but eyes burned with stubborn resolve. The weight stretched endlessly. Wind stirred the grass. Somewhere a hawk cried. Then the thunder came. Sound, distant hooves growing louder. Enemy riders crested the southern rise, armored figures on powerful horses, banners snapping. They did not rush. They slowed, spread out, testing. Arrows flew first, aimed to provoke. Shields absorbed most, though one man fell screaming as a shaft pierced his neck. "Hold," the Jarl commanded. The cavalry advanced in measured steps, hooves squelching in mud. Then horns sounded, a sharp command, and they charged. Sound, horns galloping hooves. Einar braced. The earth seemed to shake as the riders closed. At the last moment, spears thrust upward. Horses screamed, impaled or stumbling. Riders crashed forward, momentum breaking against the shield wall. The impact was devastating. Men were thrown backward. Shields shattered. Einar felt a horse slam into him, driving him to the ground. Breath exploded from his lungs. He rolled, barely avoiding trampling hooves, and came up stabbing wildly. The valley filled with chaos. Horses reared and fell. Men fought at close quarters, cavalry advantage gone. Axes found legs. Spears punched through mail. Blood soaked into the mud until the ground itself seemed alive. Sound, screams, metal tearing, horses panicking. Rolf was everywhere, dragging a fallen rider down, finishing him with a brutal blow. "Don't let them pull back," he roared. The enemy tried to regroup uphill, but the narrow ground worked against them. Their formations broke into clusters, each fighting alone. Einar locked eyes with a mounted officer struggling to free his trapped horse. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Einar hurled his spear. It struck the man square in the chest, pitching him backward. The battle ended not with a roar, but with exhaustion. Survivors fled, leaving the valley strewn with men and animals alike. The stream ran red. Silence returned, broken by labored breathing. Sound, heavy breathing, distant water. The victory felt different, harder. The enemy had adapted. So had the Vikings, but only just As they gathered the wounded, a horn sounded again from the hills. Not close, not attacking. A warning. Scouts confirmed it by dusk. More forces ahead. Infantry. Fortified towns. The Jarl's face remained calm, but his eyes darkened. Then this becomes a campaign, not a raid. Night fell under a sky thick with clouds. Rain began to fall, cold and steady, turning the valley into sludge. Fires struggled to stay lit. Sound. Rain hitting shields, low thunder. Einar sat hunched, sharing warmth with others. Across the fire, a wounded man wept quietly, clutching his leg. No one told him to stop. Rolf stared into the flames. I used to think courage meant wanting this, he said. The fight, the glory. Einar listened. Now, Rolf continued, I think it's knowing you'll hate every moment and doing it anyway. Einar nodded. He felt that truth settle deep. Before dawn, horns sounded again, this time from multiple directions. Sound, horns echoing, distant but many. They were being encircled. The Jarl moved swiftly, issuing orders. We break north before they close the net. Take only what you can carry. The march began in darkness and rain, men slipping, pushing forward through pain and fatigue. Arrows occasionally hissed from unseen positions. One struck a man in the back. He fell and did not rise. No one stopped. As the first light of day appeared, they emerged onto higher ground overlooking a wide plain dotted with villages and roads. Smoke rose in the distance from signal fires, not hearths. Einar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. This land was awake now, alert, organized. The Jarl stood beside him, surveying the plain. They will remember this moment, he said quietly. The day they realized the North did not come only to raid, but to conquer. Sound. Wind across open land, rain fading. Einar tightened his grip on his shield. The war had changed shape again. And with every mile forward, the cost of turning back grew heavier than the weight of any armor. The plain stretched endlessly before them, a patchwork of fields, roads, and low stone villages bound together by watchfires and fear. From the rise where they stood, Einar could see movement everywhere. Messengers running, gates closing, people fleeing with what they could carry. Word of the Vikings had spread faster than any longship. Sound. Wind sweeping across open ground, faint distant shouts. They descended into the plain cautiously, formations tight, scouts ranging ahead and to the flanks. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick and heavy underfoot. Each step felt deliberate, measured, as if the land itself resisted them. Rolf walked beside Einar, quieter than usual. They're ready now, he said. No more surprises. Ahead, a village lay along a crossroads, its stone walls low but solid. Armed men clustered behind makeshift barricades. Banners of a local lore hung stiff in the air. The Jarl studied the settlement from a distance. We don't waste strength, he said. We break their will. Messengers were sent forward under raised shields, offering terms, tribute, supplies, safe passage. The answer came back in the form of an arrow, striking the ground at the messenger's feet. Sound, arrow thudding into earth. So be it, the Jarl said. The assault was swift. Not a blind charge, but a tightening grip. Shields advanced in measured steps. Archers, captured bows now turned against their former owners, sent arrows over the walls. Smoke pots were hurled, filling the air with choking gray. Sound, coughing, shouted commands. Defenders fought bravely, but unevenly. They were farmers with spears, craftsmen with borrowed mail. When the gate splintered under repeated blows, panic took hold. Einar entered with the others, heart pounding. This was different from the stronghold. This was a place where children hid and elders prayed. A man rushed him with a pitchfork. Einar blocked instinctively, disarming him with a hard strike. The man fell, scrambling away. Einar did not pursue. Fire spread quickly, licking at thatched roofs. Screams echoed through narrow streets. Rolf grabbed Einar's arm. Stay focused, he said. Don't let this break you. They moved through the village, driving resistance toward the square. When it ended, the survivors knelt, hands raised, eyes wide with terror. The Jarl stood before them. Food, he said. Tools. Horses, you keep your lives. The villagers complied eagerly. Fear was a language everyone understood. Sound, crackling flames, subdued sobbing. By afternoon, the war band was resupplied. Horses replaced exhausted feet. The campaign had gained momentum and a darker rhythm. As they rode on, Einar noticed a change in his comrades. Fewer jokes, more hardened stares. Killing had become easier, but the weight of it lingered. Scouts returned with troubling news. "They're forming an army," one reported. Lords joining together. Infantry, archers, reserves. Rolf frowned. "They're learning." "They always do," the Jarl replied. "The question is how fast." They made camp near a low ridge as evening fell. Fires were lit openly now, a challenge rather than a risk. Sound, campfire crackling, murmur voices. Einar sat sharpening his blade when a young warrior approached. The boy's face was pale, eyes haunted. "I killed someone today," he said, voice barely audible. Einar looked at him. "So did I." "But he begged," the boy whispered. Einar had no answer. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sometimes that was all there was. Night brought uneasy dreams. Einar saw the river again, the stronghold burning, faces staring up from the mud. He woke before dawn, sweat cold on his skin. Sound, soft breathing, wind at dawn. Horns sounded shortly after sunrise. Not close, far, but many. Scouts confirmed the worst. The Allied enemy force was approaching from the east, marching in columns. Thousands. The Jarl gathered the war band. "We cannot outrun them forever," he said, "and we cannot face them head-on open ground." He pointed toward the ridge behind them, then beyond to a stretch of broken terrain and narrow passes. "We draw them there, bleed them, break their spirit before they break ours." The march resumed, urgency driving them forward. Behind them, dust clouds marked the enemy's advance. By midday, skirmishers clashed at the rear. Arrows flew. A man fell, then another. Each delay cost lives, but bought time. Sound. Arrows whistling, shouted warnings. Einar rode hard, lungs burning. He glanced back once and saw the enemy banners, bright and numerous, advancing with grim determination. "They're not afraid," he said to Rolf. Rolf grimaced. "Neither are we." They reached the broken ground by dusk. Rocky hills, narrow defile, uneven paths. Perfect for ambush, terrible for retreat. As the sun dipped low, the first enemy units entered the passes. The Jarl raised his hand. Sound. Sudden silence, then, "Now!" War cries tore through the air as the Vikings surged from concealment. Rocks rolled down slopes. Arrows rained from above. The enemy formation shattered in confusion. Einar leapt into the fray, adrenaline burning away exhaustion. For the first time in days, the terrain favored them completely. As night fell, the passes echoed with screams and steel. Fires burned in unnatural places. The enemy was trapped, but not defeated. Einar fought until his arms felt like stone. When at last the fighting slowed, he leaned against a rock, shaking. This was no longer about plunder or fame. It was survival against a world that had risen to crush them. Sound. Crackling fires, distant moans. And somewhere in the darkness, the enemy gathered again, learning from blood, preparing to strike back harder than before. Night swallowed the passes, but the fighting refused to sleep. Fires burned in shattered clusters along the rocky slopes, casting warped shadows that twisted like living things. The smell of smoke, sweat, and blood clung to every breath. Sound. Crackling flames, distant screams fading into low moans. Einar crouched behind a boulder, chest heaving. His hands were numb from gripping his weapon too long. Around him, shapes moved, some friendly, some not. In the darkness, every sound carried danger. A sudden clash erupted nearby. Steel rang once, then again. A scream cut short. Rolf appeared from the shadows, blood streaking his face. "They're probing," he said. "Small groups. Testing." "Let them," Einar replied hoarsely. "The ground will kill them faster than we can." Another horn sounded from deeper in the pass, answered by shouts. The enemy was reorganizing, learning how to move through the broken terrain. Sound. Horn echoing through stone. The Jarl passed quietly among his men, speaking in low tones. No pursuit. No glory tonight. Hold your ground. The hours dragged. Rain returned, light but steady, hissing against the fires. Men shivered, exhaustion gnawing at bones. Every rustle set hearts racing. Just before dawn, the enemy struck in force. Sound. Sudden shouting, rushing footsteps. They came from 3 directions at once. Infantry surging uphill, shields raised, voices chanting to keep fear at bay. Arrows flew in tight arcs, finding gaps in armor. Einar rose with the others, shield locking into place. The clash was immediate and vicious. There was no room to maneuver. Bodies pressed together, slipping on wet stone. A spear slid past Einar's shield, grazing his ribs. Pain flared white-hot. He snarled and drove his axe downward, feeling it bite deep. Rolf fought beside him, wordless now, movements automatic. Blood ran down his arm, but he did not slow. Sound, metal grinding, men grunting with effort. The enemy pushed relentlessly, trying to force a breakthrough. Behind them, more troops pressed forward, clogging the narrow path. Hold! The Jarl's voice cut through the chaos. Hold! The shield wall bent, but did not break. Above them, Vikings rolled stones down the slope. A riderless horse screamed as it tumbled, crushing men beneath it. Sound. Rocks crashing, panic cries. Gradually, the enemy assault faltered. Too many bodies. Too little space. Orders turned confusion. When the attackers finally withdrew, they left the pass carpeted with dead. Dawn revealed the cost. Men slumped where they stood, too tired to sit. Others lay unmoving, eyes open to the pale sky. Sound. Morning wind, distant birds. Einar sank to the ground, shaking. His ribs burned with each breath. He pressed a hand to the wound and found it slick with blood, but not deep enough to kill him. The Jarl gathered the captains. They'll try again, he said, and again. We cannot stay. Rolf wiped rain and blood from his eyes. Then we move before they're ready. Scouts confirmed a narrow path leading west, barely passable, hidden by brush. Dangerous, but unguarded. The decision was made quickly. The wounded who could walk were helped up. The dead were stripped of useful gear. There was no time for rites. Sound. Hurried footsteps, strained breathing. They moved under a gray sky, slipping to the western path as enemy horns sounded behind them. Arrows chased them, but the brush and rocks shielded their escape. By midday, the terrain opened into a dense forest. Trees closed around them, dampening sound and sight. For the first time in days, the enemy's presence faded. Men collapsed where they stood. Some laughed softly, on the edge of madness. Rolf sat heavily beside Einar. I thought that pass would be our grave. Einar nodded. It nearly was. Food was scarce. Water rationed. The campaign had stripped them down to essentials. Steel, flesh, will. Sound. Forest ambience, dripping leaves. As they rested, a scout returned with news that chilled the air. The enemy isn't pursuing blindly. They're splitting forces. Some ahead of us. The Jarl closed his eyes briefly. They're trying to cut us off. That night, no fires were lit. Men slept in turns, weapons in hand. Einar dreamed of the village again, faces staring, silent accusation. He woke to Rolf shaking him. Movement, he whispered. Enemy scouts slipped between the trees, moving cautiously. The Vikings struck first, silently. Knives flashed. Bodies fell without a sound. Sound. Muffled struggle. Snapping twigs. The forest became a hunting ground. Small clashes flared and vanished. The enemy learned to fear the dark under the trees. By dawn it was clear. The campaign had changed once more. No lines. No fields. Just pursuit and evasion. The Jarl addressed them quietly. We are deep now, he said. Every step forward must be paid for. Every mistake will be fatal. Einar looked around at the faces. Leaner, harder, eyes burning with something between hope and defiance. They had crossed a line. Retreat was no longer a path. It was a memory. Sound, wind through trees. As they moved deeper into the forest, Einar understood that war was no longer a series of battles. It was a test of endurance, of spirit, and the land itself had become their most dangerous enemy and their last ally. The forest tightened around them as the day wore on, branches knitting together overhead, turning the world into shadow and damp earth. Light filtered down and thin, broken lines, never lingering. The air smelled of rot and wet leaves, heavy in the lungs. Sound, forest creaking, distant birds, boots on soft ground. They moved in small groups now, spaced apart, communicating with hand signals and low whistles. Armor was dull with mud to kill its shine. Shields bore new scars layered over old ones. The war band no longer looked like conquerors. They looked like ghosts. Einar walked near the rear, ribs still aching. Every breath reminded him how close death had come. Ahead, Rolf raised a fist, signaling a halt. A low murmur passed down the line. Men crouched. Weapons came up. Scouts slipped forward, disappearing into the undergrowth. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sweat cooled on skin. Then a soft bird call, wrong for the season. Sound, sudden sharp whistle. Arrows burst from the trees. One struck a man in the eye, killing him instantly. Another punched through a shield, pinning its owner to a trunk. Ambush, someone hissed. The Vikings reacted without panic. Shields locked instinctively. They surged toward the sound, not away from it. The forest exploded with motion. Sound, arrows whistling, men shouting. Einar charged, slipping on roots, crashing through brush. An enemy archer rose from concealment too late. Einar slammed into him, driving him to the ground. The man tried to scream. Einar ended it quickly. More enemies emerged, light infantry, fast and disciplined. They knew the forest. They fought in pairs, striking and fading. Rolf roared as he went down, an arrow buried in his shoulder. Einar spun toward him, intercepting a spear meant for Rolf's chest. The impact numbed his arm. "Get up!" Einar shouted. Rolf tore the arrow free, teeth clenched. Later, the clash dissolved as suddenly as it began. The enemy melted back into the trees, leaving bodies behind. Sound, heavy breathing, forest settling. They counted losses. 5 dead, 8 wounded. The Jarl knelt beside a fallen warrior, closing his eyes. "They're hurting us," he said quietly, "driving us where they want." No one argued. They altered course, moving deeper into rough ground where even scouts hesitated. Progress slowed. Hunger gnawed. Men chewed bark and roots when dried meat ran out. That night, rain returned in sheets, soaking cloaks and bedding. Men huddled together under trees, shivering. Sound, rain pounding leaves. Einar lay awake, listening to the storm. He thought of the boy who had asked him about killing. He wondered if the boy still lived. At dawn, the forest thinned abruptly. They emerged onto a slope overlooking a wide clearing and froze. Below them stood the enemy. Hundreds of infantry arrayed in disciplined ranks. Shields locked, archers behind, officers moving along the lines. They had been waiting. Sound, distant horns ordered shouts. The trap had closed. The Jarl surveyed the scene, jaw tight. Retreat would mean running back through ambush ground. Forward meant crossing open space under arrow fire. "We go through," he said. "Together." Shields rose. Men stepped forward. Arrows fell like rain. Shields thudded. Men screamed. One staggered and fell. Another dragged him forward rather than let the line break. Sound. Arrows striking shields shouted commands. They crossed half the clearing before the enemy advanced to meet them. The collision was brutal. Lines slammed together. Spears thrust. Axes hacked. Einar fought in a blur. Vision narrow into shield, arm, blade. He slipped in blood-soaked grass, barely staying upright. An enemy soldier lunged. Einar blocked, countered. Felt bone give. Rolf was there again, unstoppable despite his wound. "Not today," he bellowed. The enemy pressed harder, numbers telling. The Vikings' line began to bow inward. The Jarl shouted for reserves that no longer existed. Then a horn sounded from the far edge of the clearing. Sound, Horn unexpected, sharp. Enemy heads turned. Confusion rippled. From the tree line, another force emerged, men bearing different banners, attacking the enemy's flank. Rivals, neighbors, enemies of their enemy. The battlefield fractured instantly. Cries of alarm replaced confident commands. The pressure on the Vikings eased. Push, the Jarl roared. They surged forward, rage renewed. Einar drove into the gap, striking, shoving, screaming without realizing it. The enemy line broke in sections, collapsing into pockets of resistance. Some fled, others fought to the death. Sound, chaotic battle noise. When it ended, the clearing was a graveyard. Bodies lay everywhere, trampled grass dark with blood. The unexpected allies withdrew without ceremony, vanishing as quickly as they had come. The Vikings stood stunned, breathing hard. Rolf laughed weakly. Seems we're not the only ones making enemies. Einar looked around at the carnage. Survival had come not from strength alone, but from the cracks in the world they had torn open. As the Jarl ordered the wounded tended and the dead gathered, Einar felt a grim clarity settle in him. This war was no longer theirs to control. Forces beyond their sight were moving now, colliding, reshaping the land. Sound, wind over clearing, and they were caught in the center of it. Warriors from the north, bleeding into history, whether they wished to or not. The forest behind them fell silent as they pressed on, leaving the clearing and its dead behind. A thin mist clung to the ground, masking the blood and the broken bodies, as though the land itself tried to forget what had passed. Men walked quietly, dragging shields and weapons, eyes wide, still tasting the metallic tang of victory mixed with exhaustion. Sound, soft misty wind, squelching boots on wet earth. Einar's legs trembled from the long hours of marching and fighting. His ribs throbbed, and every movement reminded him of the spear that had struck him in the river. Yet there was no rest. Each step carried the knowledge that the enemy would not allow them to breathe easy. This land was alive with watchers, trackers, hunters. Rolf moved beside him, his shoulder patched with crude bandages. "They're following," he said quietly. "I can feel it. Shadows in the trees, whispers on the wind." Einar nodded. "We've been followed since the river. Nothing new. But it's constant," Rolf continued, voice low. "They learn. Every skirmish, every ambush, they adjust." The Jarl halted the line briefly atop a small ridge. Before them, the terrain opened into rolling hills and low valleys. Farms and villages dotted the distance, but no smoke rose. The land seemed calm, too calm. Sound, distant crows, subtle rustle of grass. "Do not trust what you see," the Jarl said. "Calm hides teeth." Scouts were sent forward cautiously. Moments later they returned, faces pale and voices tight. Enemy forces are consolidating. Infantry moving toward the north ridge. Cavalry flanking from the west. Rolf cursed under his breath. "They're trying to trap us again." The Jarl's face remained impassive. "Then we give them what they want. We fight on our terms." Preparation began immediately. The war band spread into a defensive formation across a natural ridge. Shields angled, spears ready. Fires were kept low, only enough to ward off the damp and cold. Every man understood the stakes. This would be their last stand, or another battle in a war that would never end. Sound, men moving quietly, steel scraping. As night fell, the enemy approached. Torches bobbed among the trees, distant but unmistakable. The wind carried faint shouts and commands, the cadence of soldiers used to obeying orders. The Vikings waited silent, hidden by shadows in the uneven land. Suddenly, arrows hissed through the air. One struck a man near Einar, knocking him to the ground. Another thudded into a shield, splitting the wood. The fight began without warning. Sound, arrows, shields clashing. Einar leapt forward, shield raised, axe swinging. The enemy was numerous but disorganized, forced to move uphill through narrow passes. The Vikings' advantage was clear. Rolf followed closely, cutting down anyone who threatened the line. Despite the numbers, chaos favored the well-prepared. Stones rolled from the ridge, striking enemy ranks. Spears thrust from above, cutting down those who advanced too quickly. Screams echoed in the darkness, mingling with the clatter of weapons. Sound, chaos, screams, stones rolling. Hours passed. Einar fought until his arms ached beyond reason. The enemy pushed again and again, but the ridge held. Slowly, the attackers began to retreat, unwilling to sustain the losses in terrain that worked against them. By dawn, silence fell. The ground was littered with bodies, broken shields, and the remnants of fires. Men huddled in small groups, tending wounds, counting the living and the dead. Exhaustion had replaced adrenaline, leaving only the hollow awareness of survival. Sound, soft morning wind, water dripping. The Jarl gathered the captains. "This war is changing," he said. "They will not stop. They will adapt. But neither will we." Einar's thoughts drifted. He had killed so many in days that counting became meaningless. Yet he could not stop. Survival demanded movement, strategy, and courage beyond what he had known before. Scouts reported more enemy movements, reinforcements from distant lands, lords bringing fresh troops to defend their holdings. Each new wave promised more blood, more exhaustion, more tests of will. Rolf approached, leaning heavily on his spear. "Do you think it will ever end?" he asked, voice hoarse. Einar shook his head. "Not while we keep moving. Not while they keep learning." The Jarl made the decision. They would continue west, toward the nearest fortified town rumored to hold supplies and horses. It would be dangerous. Walls and towers awaited defenders ready. But the Vikings had learned in rivers, forests, and open plains. Staying put was death. Sound, distant birds, soft rustle of leaves. The march resumed cautiously. Men carried the wounded, stripped weapons from the dead, and kept constant watch. Even in motion, danger lingered in every shadow. As night fell again, they camped under the sparse-covered trees, weary but alert. Fires were small, shadows dancing across faces pale and lined from fatigue. No one spoke much. No laughter remained. The war had stripped them bare, leaving only steel, sweat, and survival. Einar lay back against a tree, eyes tracing the stars faintly visible through the branches. The forest was quiet, deceptive in its calm. Somewhere out there, enemy scouts watched. Somewhere, another battle waited. Sound, soft forest ambience, distant owl. He thought of the rivers, the villages, the strongholds they had left behind. Each victory had come at a cost, each advance leaving bodies, smoke, and blood in their wake. And yet, still they moved forward. Still they survived. Rolf muttered beside him, "The gods test us every day." Einar did not answer. Perhaps they did. Perhaps it was the land, the enemy, or simply the inevitability of war. Whatever it was, he knew this. They were being forged, each day harder, sharper, more unyielding. By morning, the forest had swallowed their tracks once more. They were moving, always moving. Ahead lay more villages, more enemy forces, and the next inevitable clash. But for now they rested. A brief reprieve before the storm renewed itself. Sound, soft wind, distant water, faint rustle of leaves. Einar closed his eyes, letting the forest's deceptive calm settle over him. The war was far from over. The cost would rise. Yet still they marched, Northmen bound by oath, blood, and the unyielding certainty that survival demanded sacrifice. The sun rose weak and pale through a sky choked with clouds, casting a gray light over the forest floor. Mist lingered between the trees, curling around trunks and rocks like ghosts. The air was thick with dampness and the lingering metallic scent of blood from battles past. The Vikings moved forward in silence, each man alert, every step measured. Sound, boots squelching in mud, distant birds, soft wind through branches. Einar adjusted the strap of his shield, feeling the ache in his shoulder deepen. The river, the stronghold, the valley, the clearing, they were all etched into memory now, burned into his bones. Each step forward felt heavier, yet there was no turning back. Rolf, dragging a wounded man along the path, muttered under his breath, "They never stop. Not day, not night." Einar nodded. "And neither do we. We survive because we must." The Jarl led the war band through a narrow ravine, the walls of rock on either side steep and treacherous. Scouts ran ahead, disappearing into shadows, listening, watching. Every rustle of leaves, set nerves on edge. The enemy had grown cunning, learning from every encounter. Sound, distant snapping of twigs, low wind, muffled voices. A sudden whistle cut through the trees. Arrows streaked through the air, thudding into shields and bodies alike. A man cried out as one pierced his shoulder. Einar raised his own shield just in time, the impact jarring his arm. "Ambush!" he yelled. "Form the wall." The Vikings reacted with practiced precision. Shields locked, spears thrust outward. Men moved as one, a living machine of steel and muscle. Rolf swung his axe, cleaving through a man who had emerged from behind a tree. Others followed, forcing the enemy back. Sound, steel clashing, grunts, arrows striking wood. The attackers were light infantry, quick and unpredictable, taking advantage of the narrow ravine to strike and vanish. But the Vikings had learned to anticipate such tactics. Stones were rolled down the slope, crushing legs and armor. Spears jabbed from above. Every step forward was paid for in blood. Hours passed like this, each encounter brief but brutal. By late afternoon, the enemy had been pushed back enough to create a tenuous path through the ravine. The Vikings pressed onward, every man soaked with sweat and rain, faces streaked with dirt and dried blood. Sound, heavy breathing, dripping water, distant groans. Einar stumbled over a root, catching himself on his shield. He looked around and saw Rolf standing atop a small rise, scanning the trees. The young warrior's face was pale, eyes hard. "Another trap?" Einar asked. Rolf shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. For now, the path is clear. But they're close, always close." The Jarl called them together at a small clearing. "We rest briefly," he said. "We move tonight. The enemy is gathering, and we must strike before they consolidate." The men collapsed, some leaning against rocks, others sprawled on the cold, wet ground. No fire was lit, too risky. No songs were sung, only the quiet murmur of breathing and the occasional groan of the wounded. Sound, soft wind, distant bird calls, murmured voices. Einar pulled out a small piece of dried meat and chewed it slowly, thinking of the villages they had passed, the people they had left behind, the rivers of blood that trailed their path. Victory came, yes, but it tasted bitter. Every life taken, every shield broken, every scream etched itself into memory. Rolf sat down beside him, nursing his wounded shoulder. "We're getting closer to the towns," he said. "Supplies, horses, strong walls, more fights." Einar nodded. "And more death." Sound, distant crack of a branch, sudden rustle. Suddenly, movement in the trees caught Einar's eye. Shadows shifted, too purposeful to be wind. Arrows flew before they could react, striking shields and armor. A man fell beside Einar, screaming as his thigh was pierced. "Form the wall!" Einar shouted. The Vikings surged forward, meeting the attackers mid-ravine. Steel rang against steel. Rolf roared beside him, axe swinging with deadly precision. The enemy pressed, but the narrow ground favored the defenders. Spears jabbed from both sides. Stones rolled down slopes, and the attackers faltered. Sound, clashing steel, shouted commands, heavy breathing. The fight lasted hours, though in the moment it felt endless. The enemy, though persistent, could not break the Viking line. When the last of the attackers fell back into the trees, silence settled over the ravine once more. The air was thick with smoke, blood, and the scent of wet earth. Einar sank to his knees, chest heaving. Around him, men tended to the wounded, dragged away the dead. Rolf wiped his axe, grimacing as he surveyed the ravine. "We're still alive," he said simply. "Barely," Einar replied. The Jarl approached, surveying the scene with eyes like cold steel. "They are gathering strength further ahead," he said. "We have forced them back, but the war is far from over. Every step forward will demand more from us." Sound, soft wind through trees, distant bird calls. That evening, the war band moved cautiously again, deeper into forest, leaving the ravine behind. Each man carried the weight of exhaustion, hunger, and the knowledge that death followed closely on every path. Fires were forbidden. Every movement was shadowed. As darkness fell, Einar found a small tree to lean against. He closed his eyes, feeling the pain in his ribs, the ache in his arms, the endless thrum of fear and adrenaline still coursing through him. Somewhere in the trees, the enemy waited, watching. Rolf crouched beside him. "Sleep if you can," he whispered. "Tomorrow the next fight begins." Einar nodded silently. Sleep would be brief, fragile. But for a moment, under the canopy of damp leaves and fading light, he let himself rest. The war had become an endless march through blood and shadow, a test not of skill alone, but of endurance, will, and the courage to face the next battle knowing the cost would only rise. Sound, soft rustle of leaves, distant owl hoot, quiet breathing. And so they waited, warriors of the north, moving ever forward into a land that refused mercy, toward towns fortified by stone and men hardened by fear, toward the next inevitable clash that would test the limits of their strength, their cunning, and their souls. The morning broke cold and gray, mist clinging stubbornly to the forest floor. The war band moved cautiously, each man alert, weapons ready, eyes scanning every shadow. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive after nights of ambushes and endless skirmishes. Sound, soft wind through trees, boots squelching in wet earth, distant birds. Einar's muscles ached from the previous day's fighting. His ribs still throbbed, and his hands were raw from gripping shield and axe. Yet there was no pause, no respite. The forest was alive with watchers, and the enemy's persistence ensured that every step carried danger. Rolf walked beside him, his movements slow but precise. "They adapt quickly," he muttered. "Every ambush, every trap we faced, they learn from it." Einar nodded. "And so must we. No mistakes now." The Jarl halted the column at a rocky rise overlooking a narrow valley. Smoke drifted faintly in the distance, rising from a small village. The place appeared abandoned, but scouts warned that enemy forces were near, lying in wait. Sound, distant rustle of leaves, faint creak of shields. The Jarl surveyed the terrain, eyes cold. "We move with care. No charge, no reckless attacks. This valley favors the enemy if we let them dictate." Scouts slipped ahead, disappearing into the brush. Minutes passed. A sudden scream echoed back. Arrows flew from the trees, striking shields and armor alike. Men fell immediately, caught before they could raise their defenses. "Shields up! Hold the line!" Einar shouted, raising his shield. Sound, arrows hissing, steel clashing shouts. The enemy surged from both sides, infantry pressing forward through the narrow ground. Spears jabbed, swords slashed, axes swung. The Vikings moved as one, shields locked, stepping carefully, countering attacks with precise thrusts and sweeps. Rolf fought beside him, axe cutting a path through enemy lines. "Push them back!" he roared, blood streaking his face. The fight was brutal, close, and unrelenting. Every movement required perfect timing. One slip could mean death. Men fell beside Einar, their screams echoing in the valley. The ground became slick with blood and mud, turning the battlefield into a treacherous trap for both sides. Sound, grunts, metal striking metal, arrows thudding into shields. Hours passed in chaos. The enemy attempted to flank, but the Vikings anticipated, holding their positions and using the terrain to their advantage. Stones were dislodged from the slopes, tumbling into enemy ranks. Spears jabbed from above, cutting down anyone who advanced too recklessly. Eventually, the enemy faltered, their momentum broken by the unyielding Viking defense. Retreating through the valley, they left behind bodies, broken weapons, and scattered armor. Silence descended once more, heavy and suffocating. Sound, wind through trees, soft groans of wounded, distant birds. Einar sank to his knees, chest heaving. Around him, men tended to wounds, dragged the dead to the edges of the field. Rolf wiped his axe clean, breathing hard. "We survived," he said simply. Einar nodded, feeling hollow. Survival came at a cost too high to name. Every victory carved new scars, some visible, others etched into mind and soul. The Jarl addressed the war band. "The enemy gathers strength ahead," he said. "We will not confront them blindly. Tonight, we move to higher ground. Tomorrow, we strike on our terms." Sound, soft rustle of leaves, distant flowing water. As night fell, they moved carefully through the forest, leaving the valley behind. Fires were minimal, only to dry damp clothing and tend wounds. The men were silent, exhausted, yet alert. Every crack of a branch, every whisper wind set nerves on edge. Einar found a small clearing to rest, leaning against a tree. Rolf joined him, shoulder still wounded. "The towns are coming," Rolf murmured. "Fortified walls, men ready. This will be harder than anything we faced." Einar nodded slowly. "And yet we move forward. No choice now." The Jarl held a council with the captains under the shadow trees. They discussed strategy quietly, routes, ambush points, the use of terrain, the need to preserve strength. There was no room for error. Every decision mattered. Every moment held consequences. Sound. Soft murmurs, metal being adjusted. Scouts returned with word of enemy movements. A fortified town lay ahead, defended by lords who had gathered their forces. Infantry, archers, and cavalry all prepared to oppose the Vikings' advance. The Jarl's face was unreadable, but the line of his jaw betrayed focus. "They underestimate us," he said. "Let them learn their error." Einar tightened his grip on his axe, feeling a familiar thrill mixed with dread. The battles thus far had hardened him, taught him the rhythm of survival. But the war ahead promised new challenges, fierce resistance, and bloodshed that would test them to the limit. Night passed with uneasy rest. Small skirmishes erupted, scouts clashing with enemy patrols, arrows flying into the darkness. The forest echoed with cries and the clash of steel. Every man slept lightly, weapon in hand, eyes flicking to shadows. Sound. Faint rustle, whisper instructions, distant owl. By dawn, the forest opened to a wide plain, the fortified town rising in the distance. Towers loomed, walls thick, and men visible on the ramparts. Smoke curled from chimneys and signal fires, a warning and a challenge both. The Jarl gathered the men. "We have come far. The towns ahead hold supplies, horses, and glory, but they are prepared. We must strike smart, move with purpose. Strike as one." Einar felt the weight of anticipation. Every battle so far had been a lesson, every ambush a test. The men beside him were scarred, hardened, and ready. The forest behind had protected them, but the open plains and fortified walls ahead would demand everything they had learned. Sound. Soft wind over grass, distant horns from the town. The Vikings advanced cautiously, forming lines, shields raised, eyes fixed on the walls. Scouts ran ahead, testing defenses, noting weak points. Archers notched arrows. Spears were ready. Every man understood the stakes. Einar adjusted his shield, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. The war had changed them. The river, the stronghold, the ravine, the valley, the clearing, all were behind them now. Ahead lay stone walls, disciplined enemies, and the next inevitable battle. Sound. Marching feet, soft wind, distant birds. This was no longer a campaign of raids. It was a war of survival, strategy, and endurance. The cost would rise, yet the Vikings moved forward, unyielding, unbroken, bound together by oath, blood, and the certainty that the only way to live was to continue moving, to fight, and to endure whatever horrors lay ahead. The town rose ahead like a stone sentinel, its walls dark against morning sky, towers piercing the low clouds. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the banners of the local lords snapped stiffly in the wind. The Jarl halted the war band at the edge of the clearing, surveying the terrain with sharp, calculating eyes. Sound. Wind whistling distant crows, soft rustle of grass. Einar adjusted his shield, feeling the familiar ache in his ribs. Every mile forward had added scars. Every fight left its mark. The forest, the ravines, the valley. They had hardened him, but the town ahead promised a different kind of challenge. Stone walls, archers trained to strike, men drilled in discipline. Rolf leaned close, voice low. "They've had time to prepare. This won't be easy." The Jarl nodded. "Then we do not give them the advantage. Night falls soon. That is when we strike." Scouts moved forward carefully, disappearing into shadows. They returned with news of weak points. A collapsed wall at the rear, a poorly guarded gate used only for supplies. The Jarl's eyes narrowed. "Fire and distraction," he said. "We split their attention. We strike swiftly, and we take what they did not expect." Sound. Soft whispers, armor clinking, faint wind. As night descended, the Vikings moved into position. Fires were lit small and hidden, meant to lure the defenders' gaze. The first wave advanced toward the main gate, shields high, spears ready. Rolf led a flanking group through the shadows to the rear, carrying torches and oil to create chaos. Einar's heart pounded as they approached the wall. Arrows hissed from above, striking shields and armor. One man fell beside him, silent, eyes wide with shock. "Press forward," the Jarl shouted. "Do not let fear dictate." Sound. Arrows hitting shields, men shouting, metal clanging. The first gate splintered under repeated strikes. Inside, defenders scrambled, trying to form ranks. The flanking parties struck simultaneously. Flames erupted as oil ignited. Smoke filled the courtyard, burning eyes, choking lungs, and throwing defenders into panic. Einar crashed through the chaos, swinging his axe at anyone who opposed him. Rolf was nearby, dragging a soldier to ground and finishing him quickly. Screams echoed from the upper floors. Some defenders tried to flee through side exits, only to be cut down by archers perched on the walls. Sound. Clanging metal, screams, crackling fire. The fighting was brutal and close. Every movement mattered. One misstep meant death. Einar parried a downward strike from a soldier armed with a sword, countering a thrust that ended the man's resistance. Around him, men moved in synchronized chaos, striking, pushing, and holding. By midnight, the main courtyard belonged to the Vikings. Fire still burned in corners, smoke choking the remaining defenders. The enemy line had fractured completely. Many surrendered, raising hands, eyes wide with fear. Others died where they stood, fighting to the last breath. Sound. Crackling flames, moans, distant shouting. The Jarl stood atop the broken wall, surveying the aftermath. "This town will remember this night," he said quietly. "Not for the walls it built, but for how it fell." Einar's chest heaved. Around him, men dragged the wounded to safer ground, stripped the dead of supplies and weapons, and prepared for the inevitable counterattack. Rolf approached him, wiping sweat and blood from his face. "The lords will bring reinforcements," he said. "They will not forget this." Einar nodded, grim. "Nor will we." Sound. Distant hooves, wind to the ruined town. They fortified the captured positions quickly, barricading gates, setting lookouts, and tending to the wounded. The Jarl moved among them, calm but ever watchful. He spoke quietly to captains, adjusting positions, anticipating the enemy's next moves. The men rested briefly, exhaustion heavy in every limb. Few words were spoken. The way of survival, of bloodshed, pressed on them. Yet beneath it lay a quiet satisfaction. This night belonged to them, a hard-fought victory that had been carved from fire, steel, and courage. Sound. Low murmurs, dripping water, distant crows. At dawn, scouts reported enemy forces moving in from surrounding lands. Reinforcements gathered, determined to reclaim the town and punish those who had dared attack. The Jarl studied the reports, eyes narrow. "They believe they can retake this place," he said. "Let them come. They will find more than walls. They will find men who know the price of war." Einar tightened his grip on his axe, muscles already aching from the night's battle. The war had changed him. No longer was it a matter of raids or plunder. It was strategy, survival, and endurance, a relentless test of mind, body, and spirit. Rolf crouched beside him, voice low. "We've taken this town, but at what cost? Men are dead, friends gone." Einar stared at the smoking ruins, remembering the faces of those lost along the way. The river, the stronghold, the ravine, the valley. "It is always the cost," he said, "and always worth it if we survive." Sound. Soft wind, distant calls of birds, crackling fire. The day passed slowly. Men repaired barricades, gathered supplies, and tended to the wounded. Fires were kept low, a precaution against enemy observation. Scouts returned repeatedly, bringing word of approaching forces. The tension was constant, unrelenting. As night fell again, the enemy's presence became unmistakable. Horns sounded in the distance, signaling a coordinated advance. Einar and Rolf stood on the walls, surveying the horizon. Thousands moved in disciplined formations, infantry, archers, and cavalry prepared to crush those who had dared take the town. Sound, distant horns, rhythmic marching, horses snorting. The Jarl addressed the war band. "Tonight, we do not fight for glory," he said. "We fight to survive. Hold your ground. Protect what we have taken. And remember, every man beside you is your strength." Einar felt the weight of the words. This was no longer a simple campaign. It was a crucible, testing every lesson learned in rivers, forests, valleys, and ambushes. The cost of failure was total. The cost of survival, high, but manageable if they fought as one. Sound, distant marching, whispering wind, soft metal clanging. He adjusted his shield, checked his axe, and looked to Rolf. "Are you ready?" he asked. Rolf's lips pressed into a grim line. "Always." And so they waited, warriors of the north, eyes fixed on the horizon, muscles tense, hearts pounding. Beyond the walls, the enemy gathered, countless and disciplined, unaware that the Vikings they underestimated would not yield easily. The night stretched ahead, and with it, the promise of fire, blood, and the unyielding test of courage that would decide not just the town, but the fate of those who had survived this far. Sound, soft wind, distant horn echoes, quiet murmur of men preparing. The war continued relentless, as the Vikings steeled themselves for the inevitable clash, knowing that their legacy would be written not by the walls they stormed, but by the courage, sacrifice, and unbroken will they carried into every battle to come. The town lay quiet under a moonless sky, smoke from previous fires still curling from ruined buildings. The streets were littered with debris, shattered shields, and the remnants of battle. Men moved cautiously through the shadows, checking barricades, tending the wounded, and sharpening weapons for the night ahead. Sound, soft wind through broken rooftops, distant water dripping, occasional groan of the wounded. Einar leaned against a shattered wall, letting exhaustion weigh down his limbs. His ribs still burned, muscles ached, and the taste of iron lingered in his mouth. Yet there was no time to rest fully. Scouts had reported enemy movements, more troops arriving under the cover of darkness, flanking positions forming to retake the town. Rolf approached, dragging a wounded comrade. His eyes were hard, voice low. "They are coming," he said. "Not just the lords of this town, but men from neighboring lands. They will converge here." The Jarl gathered the captains in the shadow of a partially collapsed tower. "Tonight, we do not wait," he said. "We strike first, sow confusion, and force them to fight on our terms. We take the initiative or we die." Sound, faint rustle of fabric, distant hooves, whispers of men. Preparations were swift and precise. Torches were positioned to lure attention. Traps set in narrow alleyways. An archer stationed on rooftops with clear lines of sight. Spears were sharpened, axes cleaned, and men drilled in quiet coordination. The Vikings had learned that every misstep could be fatal, and every advantage mattered. Einar checked his gear once more, feeling the familiar weight of shield and axe. Rolf moved beside him, adjusting his own armor and whispering, "Tonight, we test them, not just with steel, but with fire and fear." The first sounds of the enemy came faintly. Marching feet, distant orders, the rhythm of disciplined soldiers advancing under cloak of night. They approached from multiple directions, attempting to surround the town. Sound, distant marching, horses snorting, soft commands and low voices. The Jarl gave the signal. Fires flared in hidden corners. Oil ignited along narrow streets, and the first volley of arrows flew from rooftops and barricades. Screams erupted as confusion spread through enemy ranks. The surprise attack threw them into disorder before they could coordinate. Einar charged through the chaos, axe swinging, shield raised. Rolf followed, cutting down anyone who tried to regroup. The narrow streets favored the Vikings, who had set traps and controlled the pace of the fight. Rocks rolled from upper floors, crushing shields and legs alike. Sound, clashing steel, screams cracking wood, distant shouting. The enemy attempted to form a defensive line near the main square, but the Vikings struck relentlessly. Archers targeted officers and mounted men, while spear-wielding warriors cut down anyone attempting to push forward. The town had become a labyrinth, favoring those who knew its streets and had prepared every corner. By midnight, the majority of the attackers were forced back, some fleeing through side gates, others trapped and cut down in the chaos. Fires burned, smoke choking both enemy and Viking, but the advantage remained with those who had seized the initiative. Sound, crackling flames, distant cries, soft wind. Einar paused briefly on a balcony, catching his breath, surveying the chaos below. Men moved with deadly efficiency, every strike calculated, every movement purposeful. This was not plunder, it was war. Survival demanded precision, courage, and unwavering focus. Rolf joined him, blood and sweat streaking his face. "They will regroup," he said. "More will come. This fight is not over." The Jarl moved among his men, reinforcing barricades, relocating archers, and preparing for the inevitable counterattack. "Hold nothing back," he ordered. "Every man here is a wall, every axe a hammer. We do not yield." Sound, distant horn, faint marching, men moving silently. Hours passed with tension unbroken. Scouts returned with intelligence. Reinforcements were gathering further outside, lords consolidating troops for a renewed assault at dawn. The Vikings had held the town for the night, but daylight would bring fresh dangers. Einar leaned against the wall again, muscles trembling. His mind replayed the battles of the previous days. The river, the ravine, the valley, the clearing, and now the town. Each fight had been a test, each victory hard-won, each loss etched into memory. Rolf crouched beside him. "We are far from finished," he said. "But we've proven something tonight. They cannot break us easily." Sound, soft wind, distant groans of wounded, crackling fire. The night deepened, and silence settled over the ruined town. Fires burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced across broken walls and abandoned streets. The Vikings moved through the shadows, checking positions, ensuring the wounded were hidden and that every trap remained in place. The Jarl addressed the war band before the first light. "We have survived the night," he said, "but dawn brings a real test. They will come in strength, and we must be ready not just with steel, but with courage and resolve." Einar adjusted his grip on his axe, feeling the familiar tension in his muscles. He knew the cost of what lay ahead would be high. Men would fall, friends would die, but they had endured this far, through rivers, forests, valleys, ravines, and open plains. Survival had become a habit, forged in blood and fire. Sound, distant horns, soft rustle of the wind, faint water dripping. As the first hints of light touched the horizon, the enemy began to advance again, marching in disciplined formations toward the town. Infantry, cavalry, and archers moved as one, confident in numbers, unaware of the traps, barricades, and sharpened axes awaiting them. The Jarl's voice rose, steady and commanding. "Hold the walls. Strike as one. Remember your brothers beside you. Every man is the difference between life and death." Einar took his place along the barricade, shield raised, eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. Rolf was beside him, axe ready, muscles coiled like springs. The town was theirs to defend, but the cost would be great. Sound, marching, approaching, distant commands, soft wind through broken rooftops. The morning light revealed the enemy fully, banners snapping in the wind, disciplined troops advancing toward the town. The clash was imminent. Every man on the walls knew that this would be a battle of endurance, strategy, and courage, a test not just of skill, but the will to survive and protect what they had seized. Einar felt the adrenaline rise, muscles tensing, breath steadying. This was the moment they had prepared for. The Vikings would not yield. They had survived too much, fought too many battles, and endured too many losses to falter now. Sound, distant horn, men shouting, metal clashing. And as the enemy drew near, the war band of the North stood ready, unbroken, hardened by fire and blood, prepared to write the next chapter in a saga of courage, sacrifice, and relentless survival. Dawn broke over the town like a pale promise, the gray light illuminating streets littered with debris from the previous night's battle. Smoke from the burned gates curled upward, the acrid smell of charred wood and blood hanging thick in the air. The Vikings stood along the walls, shields raised, eyes scanning the horizon for the approaching enemy. Sound, distant marching, clattering hooves, soft wind through broken rooftops. Einar adjusted the strap of his shield, feeling the familiar ache in his ribs. The previous night's fighting had left every man raw and tense, yet no one dared slacken their vigilance. This day would not be won through cunning alone. It would demand endurance, courage, and the unyielding coordination of the warriors who had survived every prior test. Rolf crouched beside him, sharpening the edge of his axe. "They have learned from yesterday," he muttered. "Expect discipline, expect numbers, and expect them to fight without hesitation." Einar nodded. "Then we fight smarter. We hold every advantage we can seize." The Jarl moved along the walls, inspecting positions, adjusting archers and spear-bearers, eyes calculating the enemy's formation. "They will attempt to break us at the gate," he said to the captains. "Archers must target officers first. Spearmen hold the main approaches. Every man must be ready for close combat. There is no margin for error." Sound, soft clatter of armor, whispered commands, distant horn. The enemy appeared first as a line of infantry at the edge of the field, banners snapping stiffly in the wind. Behind them, cavalry moved in slow arcs. Archers perched to rain death from distance. Discipline was apparent. This was a force determined to reclaim the town. Einar felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, muscles coiling, heart beating with precision. "They believe their numbers will carry them," he muttered to Rolf. "We will see who underestimates whom." The Jarl raised his hand. Arrows soared from the walls, raining down into the enemy ranks. The front line faltered as shields splintered and cries of pain erupted. Rolf swung his axe at a charging soldier, knocking him to the ground, while Einar pressed forward, shield first, striking with precision at anyone who breached the line. Sound, arrows whistling, steel clashing, men shouting. The enemy pressed relentlessly. Spears jabbed upward, swords slashed sideways, and axes cut through shields and armor alike. The narrow streets and broken buildings favored the defenders, yet the attackers adapted quickly, pushing forward with disciplined determination. Einar parried a thrust aimed at his shoulder, countering with a downward strike that sent a man stumbling into the debris-strewn street. Blood pooled at their feet, mingling with mud and ash. Around him, men fought with a deadly rhythm, each movement a calculated response to chaos. Sound, grunts, metal striking metal, distant screams. Hours passed, the battle grinding forward in relentless waves. The enemy attempted to flank the walls, sending small units through alleyways, hoping to breach from behind. But the Vikings had anticipated such tactics. Traps concealed in rubble, hidden pits, and sharpened stakes turned the alleys into death traps. Rolf intercepted one group, attempting to slip through a side street. His axe swung with precision, cutting down the first attacker before the rest could react. Einar followed, shield raised, driving the enemy back toward the main square. Panic spread among their ranks as confusion took hold. Sound, cracking wood screams, arrows striking walls. The Jarl moved to the center of the wall, shouting commands, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold your ground. Every man is the wall. Every axe is a hammer. Do not falter." The enemy faltered at last, the tide of battle shifting as the defenders pressed forward with coordinated force. Spears jabbed from walls, rocks rolled down onto the attackers, and archers continued to target officers and cavalry alike. Slowly, the momentum swung in favor of the Vikings. Sound, heavy breathing, clanging steel, cries of pain. By midday, the enemy's advance had broken. Survivors fled through scattered gates, some cut down by pursuing archers, others ensnared by traps. The town, battered and scarred, still stood under the control of the Vikings, though the cost had been high. Einar sank against the wall, chest heaving. Rolf collapsed beside him, wiping sweat and blood from his face. "We survived," he said, simply, voice strained. Einar nodded, looking at the ruined streets. "But not without loss. Too many have fallen." Sound, distant wind, soft groans of wounded, crackling fires. The Jarl gathered the captains again, speaking quietly now that the immediate danger had passed. "This town will hold for now, but reinforcements will come. We must repair defenses, fortify barricades, and prepare for the inevitable counterattack. Survival is not a gift. It is earned every day." Men moved swiftly, hauling debris, repairing walls, and setting watch posts. Fires were controlled, used only for warmth and signaling. The wounded were tended, some hidden in cellars, others carried to safer areas. The atmosphere was tense but focused. Exhaustion had not diminished their vigilance. Sound. Hammers on wood, low murmur of men, soft wind. Einar walked the streets, observing the effort. Faces were pale, eyes hardened, yet there was a spark of defiance. They had survived what many would have deemed impossible. Every river, forest, valley, ravine, and previous clash had brought them to this moment, and they had endured. Rolf joined him again, voice low. They will regroup, you know. More troops will come, stronger and more prepared. Einar nodded. Then we will be ready. Every fight teaches us. Every loss sharpens us. We are not the same men who left the forest days ago. We are something more now. Sound. Distant horn. Faint bird calls, soft wind through the streets. As evening fell, scouts reported distant movements. Enemy forces gathering, preparing for renewed assault under the cover of night. The Jarl called for silence. Torches were minimized, positions reinforced, and archers readied. Every man knew the night would test them as harshly as the day. Einar adjusted his shield, gripping his axe tightly. Rolf stood beside him, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the horizon. The town was theirs for now, but tomorrow could demand the ultimate sacrifice. Sound. Distant marching, soft rustle of wind, low murmurs of men preparing. The Vikings moved into positions along the walls and streets, silent and ready. The night held them, tense and expectant, a fragile moment before the storm. Every man understood the stakes. Bodies would fall, courage would be tested, and only unity and skill would determine who survived. The Jarl addressed them briefly, voice steady. Hold your ground. Fight with everything. Remember why we endure. Tonight, we are more than men. We are the guardians of this place. And if they come, let them find that the Northmen do not yield. Sound. Soft wind, distant owl. Quiet preparation of weapons. Einar looked out over the town, muscles tense, heart steady. The enemy would come, but they would find a force forged in fire, blood, and unrelenting resolve. The Vikings had survived every test thus far, and they would endure whatever came next. Sound. Distant marching growing closer. Soft clatter of armor. As the first shadows of approaching forces touched the town's outskirts, Einar gripped his axe tightly, eyes narrowing. Rolf beside him nodded. The war was far from over. Yet in that moment, they were ready, warriors of the north, unbroken, hardened by every river, forest, ravine, and battlefield they had survived, prepared to face the storm again, no matter the cost. And so the night deepened, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash, a crucible that would test courage, strategy, and the unyielding will of those who refused to be defeated. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, pale and gray, illuminating the town's battered streets and shattered walls. The air was thick with smoke, the lingering scent of blood and ash heavy in every breath. The enemy had regrouped overnight, their numbers greater now, discipline sharper, determination burning in their eyes. Sound. Distant marching, hooves clattering, faint commands. Einar stood atop the wall, shield strapped his arm, axe ready. The night had been long, filled with vigilance and preparation. But the real test had only just begun. He scanned the horizon, counting formations, noting the movement of infantry, archers, and cavalry. Every detail mattered. Every lapse could be fatal. Rolf crouched beside him, voice low and tense. They've learned from yesterday. Expect traps, ambushes, and fierce resistance. They will not falter. Einar nodded. Then we must not falter either. Every man here knows what is at stake. The Jarl moved among the walls, inspecting the defensive positions, speaking quietly to captains, adjusting archers, and moving spearmen to the most vulnerable points. Hold your ground, he said. Strike first. Strike hard. Let them feel the cost of attacking Northmen. Sound. Soft rustle of armor, faint commands, distant horn. The enemy advanced in coordinated ranks, banners snapping in the wind, boots thudding against the hard ground. Archers took positions on distant hills, aiming for the walls, while infantry prepared to breach the gates. Cavalry circled, testing for weak points, probing for opportunities. Einar felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, muscles coiled, breath steady. "They think numbers alone will carry them," he said to Rolf. "Let them learn otherwise." The Jarl raised his hand. Arrows erupted from the walls, striking the front lines of the enemy with deadly accuracy. Screams echoed as shields splintered and men fell. Rolf charged, swinging his axe in wide arcs, cutting down anyone who tried to close in. Einar pressed forward, shield first, driving back soldiers attempting to breach the barricades. Sound. Arrows whistling, metal clashing, men shouting. The battle surged back and forth, each side pressing, retreating, and clashing again. The narrow streets and broken buildings favored the defenders, but the enemy adapted quickly, pushing to the chaos with organized determination. Einar parried a downward strike aimed at his head, countering with a blow that sent a man stumbling into a ruined building. Blood mingled with mud and ash beneath his boots. Around him, men fought with deadly precision, each movement measured, each strike purposeful. Sound, grunts, steel striking steel, distant cries. Hours passed in relentless combat. The enemy attempted to flank the walls, sending units through alleyways, hoping to bypass the main defenses. But the Vikings had prepared. Pits hidden beneath rubble, sharpened stakes, and barricades funneled attackers into kill zones. Rolf intercepted a small group trying to move along a side street. His axe struck first, then Einar joined, pressing the enemy back toward the square. Panic spread as their formations broke under coordinated strikes from the defenders. Sound, cracking wood screams, arrows striking walls. The Jarl moved to the center of the walls, shouting commands, steadying the men. "Do not falter. Every man is a shield, every axe a hammer. Fight with everything or fall." By midday, the enemy's advance had slowed to a crawl. Casualties mounted, and morale began to waver. Archers on the walls continued to target leaders and mounted soldiers, while infantry pressed forward with relentless precision. Slowly, the momentum shifted, the tide of battle turning in favor of the defenders. Sound, heavy breathing, clanging metal, cries of pain. Einar sank briefly against the wall, chest heaving. Rolf rested beside him, wiping sweat and blood from his face. "We're holding," he said, voice strained but resolute. Einar nodded, surveying the streets. "But the cost is high. Too many have fallen already." Sound, soft wind, distant groans of wounded, crackling fire. The Jarl called for a temporary regroup. Barricades were reinforced, fires tended, and the wounded hidden in cellars or behind walls. Every man knew the enemy would return, perhaps with even greater strength. There was no time for celebration, only the grim task of survival and preparation. Einar walked through the streets, noting the faces of the men around him, pale, tired, yet unbroken. Each had fought rivers, forests, valleys, ravines, and open plains. Each had survived impossible odds. This town, though battered, was theirs, for now. Rolf joined him again. They will return, and they will be stronger, but so will we. Sound, distant horn, soft rustle wind, quiet murmurs. As night fell, scouts reported movement in the distance. Enemy forces gathering for a renewed assault. The Jarl ordered silence, minimal fires, and the tightening of defenses. Every man prepared for another night of vigilant survival. Einar checked his shield and axe, feeling the tension in his muscles. The town was theirs, but victory was fragile. One misstep, one lapse in focus, could undo all they had fought for. Sound, soft wind through streets, distant marching, faint hooves. The Jarl spoke briefly to the war band. "Tonight, we fight not for glory, but to endure. Every man beside you is your strength. Every strike, every shield, every breath counts." Einar stood along the walls, heart steady, eyes fixed on the horizon. Rolf was beside him, muscles coiled, ready for whatever came next. The enemy would come, but the Vikings had endured every test so far, and they would endure this one as well. Sound, distant marching growing closer, soft clatter of armor. The night stretched ahead, tense and expectant. Every man knew that the next clash could decide not only the town, but the lives of those who had survived so far. Courage, strategy, and unyielding would be tested. Einar adjusted his grip on his axe, eyes narrowing as the first shadows of the approaching forces touched the outskirts of the town. Rolf gave a slight nod, and the Jarl's hand rose in silent command. Sound. Metal clanging faintly in the distance, distant shouting, wind over ruined rooftops. The town held its breath. The Vikings, unbroken and hardened by every river, forest, ravine, valley, and battlefield, waited, ready to meet the storm, to defend what they had seized, and to fight with everything they had learned. The battle was far from over, but the Northmen would not yield. The first light of dawn painted the town in muted gold, illuminating shattered rooftops, broken gates, and streets littered with debris. The air was thick with smoke, the stench of blood and fire lingering heavily. The enemy had gathered in full force, their banners snapping stiffly in the morning breeze, boots striking the earth in synchronized rhythm, a calculated advance meant to crush the defenders in one decisive assault. Sound. Distant marching, hooves clattering, commands shouted in low tones. Einar adjusted his shield, muscles coiled and ready. The nights of vigilance, the ambushes, the river crossings, ravines, valleys, and countless skirmishes had prepared him for this moment. Yet the weight of anticipation pressed heavily on his shoulders. Every man along the walls and streets knew the cost of failure. Every misstep could bring death or worse. Rolf crouched beside him, axe poised. They're disciplined. They've learned from every mistake, he murmured. Expect everything and trust no one. Einar's jaw tightened. Then we give them nothing. Every arrow, every strike, every movement counts. We do not falter. The Jarl moved among the defenders, inspecting positions, adjusting archers and spear-bearers, and moving men to vulnerable points. His voice cut through the quiet tension. Hold the walls. Strike first. Strike hard. Let them see that Northmen do not yield. Sound. Armor clattering. Low murmurs of men preparing, distant horn. The enemy advanced steadily. Infantry at the front, archers on the flanks, and cavalry circling the prow for weaknesses. They believed their numbers would overwhelm the battered defenders, unaware that those who remained were not just men. They were warriors tempered by fire, blood, and relentless survival. Arrows rained from the walls before the enemy could reach the gates. Screams erupted as shields splintered and men fell. Einar pressed forward with Rolf at his side, axe swinging, shield high, striking down anyone who tried to breach the barricades. The streets became a chaotic maze of fire, smoke, and steel. Sound. Arrows whistling, clashing metal, screams. The enemy pressed relentlessly, but the Vikings had prepared. Narrow streets, barricaded gates, and hidden pits funneled attackers into kill zones. Archers on rooftops targeted officers and cavalry, while spearmen held every approach. Every man fought with precision and unyielding resolve. Einar parried a sword thrust aimed at his side, countering with a strike that sent a soldier sprawling into debris. Around him, men moved in deadly harmony, striking, pushing, and holding the line. The town had become a crucible, testing skill, courage, and endurance. Sound. Grunts, steel striking steel, cries of pain. Hours passed with unrelenting combat. The enemy attempted flanking maneuvers through side streets, only to fall into prepared traps. Rolf intercepted one group, his axe sweeping clean through the attackers. Einar followed, driving the enemy back toward the central square. Panic rippled through their ranks as coordination collapsed. The Jarl's voice rang out above the chaos. Hold your ground. Every man is a wall. Every strike matters. By midday, the enemy's momentum faltered. Archers and spearmen on the walls continued to inflict casualties. Cavalry, unable to navigate the streets, were forced to retreat. Slowly, the tide turned in favor of the defenders. Victory was within reach, yet every man knew the cost had been high. Sound. Heavy breathing, metal striking metal, distant cries. Einar sank briefly against the wall, chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking his face. Rolf rested beside him, wiping grime and blood. "We've held," he said, voice strained but determined. Einar surveyed the battlefield, eyes sweeping over the ruined streets. But the cost, too many have fallen. Sound. Soft wind, distant groans of wounded, crackling fires. The Jarl called for regrouping. Barricades were reinforced. Fires tended, and the wounded were moved to hidden areas. Every man understood that reinforcements would arrive, and the town must hold. Survival depended not only on courage, but also on strategy, endurance, and the bonds between the men who had endured so much together. As the day wore on, enemy forces began to withdraw. Their ranks thinned, morale fractured. The Vikings held the town, battered but unbroken. Rolf surveyed the horizon. "They will come again," he said. "But they know now that they cannot crush us easily." Einar nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion and triumph in equal measure. The battles, the ambushes, the rivers, valleys, and ravines, they had all led to this moment. Survival was never guaranteed, but endurance, courage, and unity had made it possible. Sound, soft wind, distant crows, low murmurs of men. As night fell, fires burned low, torches illuminating faces tired but resolute. Men tended to the wounded, repaired defenses, and remained vigilant. The Jarl addressed them one final time before rest. "We have survived what many thought impossible. But remember, every day in war demands courage. Every battle demands sacrifice. Hold this town, defend your brothers, and honor those who have fallen." Einar adjusted his shield, axe ready at his side. Rolf stood beside him, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the dark streets. The war had been long, brutal, and relentless, yet the men of the north had endured. They had fought through rivers, forests, valleys, ravines, plains, and towns, each battle shaping them, hardening them, and forging their unbreakable spirit. Sound, distant wind, faint dripping water, soft crackle of fires. As he looked across the town, Einar thought of those lost along the way. Friends, comrades, men whose courage had paved the path to survival. Their sacrifice was etched into every stone, every bloodied street, every broken gate. And yet, they had endured. Rolf spoke quietly. "We've survived, Einar, against all odds." Einar nodded. "Yes, but survival is not enough. We carry the lessons, the memories, and the strength forward. That is what makes us more than survivors. We are warriors." Sound, soft wind, distant owl, quiet murmur of men preparing for rest. The town, scarred and battered, stood as a testament to courage, strategy, and the unyielding will of the Vikings. They had fought with precision, endured unthinkable hardships, and faced death countless times. And in the end, they had prevailed not by chance, but through unity, discipline, and relentless determination. As night deepened, the war band finally allowed themselves a moment of rest. Men sat or leaned against walls, weary but alive, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. The Jarl stood atop the wall, silent, watching the horizon. Victory had been earned through blood, sacrifice, and unbroken spirit. Einar closed his eyes briefly, feeling the exhaustion and weight of the past battles. Yet within him burned a fierce pride, a recognition of the strength forged through fire and steel. The war had tested everything: skill, courage, endurance, and loyalty. And through it all, the Vikings had endured. Sound, soft wind over rooftops, distant owl, faint crackling fire. The night was calm now, a fragile peace after relentless chaos. Einar and Rolf remained vigilant, aware that tomorrow might demand the same courage. Yet in that moment, there was a quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. The cost of war had been high, but the lessons were clear. Courage, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve were the pillars of survival. The Vikings had endured, their legacy written in every scar, every fallen comrade, and every victory claimed through strength and strategy. And so, as the town rested under the fragile blanket of night, the warriors of the North stood ready for whatever came next, unbroken, hardened, and resolute, bearing the scars, the memories, and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to yield. Sound, soft wind fading, distant night creatures, quiet breathing of men. The saga of rivers, forests, ravines, valleys, ambushes, and towns had reached a culmination. The battles had tested body and soul, yet they endured. And in the quiet aftermath, the Vikings knew this truth above all. The cost of survival was high, but the courage to face every dawn, to fight and to endure, was what truly defined them.